In this exercise, we're going to begin our 3-movie look at the preferences command. That's all we're going to do, just 3 movies. The idea is we're going to get in there and out as quickly as possible. And I'm not going to cover every single preference setting, just the ones that I think are set wrong by default, and I recommend that you change. So I'm still working inside this file called screenwithswatches.ai, found inside the O2 workspace folder. And I'm going to press the Control and Spacebar keys, or Command and Spacebar on a Mac, and I'm going to marquee around some of these pen tool cursors, and I'm going to zoom in even farther and ultimately take in one of these cursors at the 4,800% zoom ratio. Now then, let's say that I want to tweak one of these edges right here around the pen tool. And notice that this is a pretty good representation of the pen tool cursor, I think. If I press the P key in order to switch to the pen tool, that guy right there, and I move my cursor off to the side so we can see it, I don't have a lot of detail to work with, but that looks like a pretty good match to me. It's wide at the bottom. It looks like it flares outward and so on. But I'm not sure about the edge of the pen. So in other words, the area where the pen right here meets the nib. Is that too wide, that region right there? I'm not really sure. I might want to adjust it. It looks like it's just a single pixel in the cursor. So I'm going to switch over to the direct selection tool, what I call the white arrow tool. And notice it has a keyboard shortcut of A for arrow, so that makes a lot of sense. The black arrow tool, by the way, or the selection tool if you prefer, goes ahead and selects whole objects, whereas the white arrow tool, or the direct selection tool, goes ahead and selects individual anchor points and control handles and that kind of thing. So far, you may not be familiar with those terms, but you will be well familiar with them as we get farther into the series. Now then, I'm going to go ahead and click on this point right there in order to select it. And I can tell there's a point there because my cursor has a little square next to it when I hover over it. And then I'll drop down to this point and I'll shift click on it to select it as well. And then I'll shift click on this point in order to select it. So I have these 3 points selected. And now I could drag them around like so, but that's going to be a fairly indiscreet change. That's going to look terrible, in other words. So I'll press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac to undo that modification. Or I could nudge these points from the keyboard using the arrow keys. Now, supposedly, you have all kinds of fine-tuned control using the arrow keys. For example, if I press the left arrow key, I would move these points over 1 point. That is 1/72 of an inch inside of my illustration. But I think the area was already too long, not too short. So I'll press the right arrow key to reinstate the original position of those points, and then I'll press the right arrow key again to move them inward. And now you can see they go way too far. So I don't have enough control over my nudging. All right, so I'll go ahead and press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac to undo that modification. Let's change a preference setting. Go up to the Edit menu here on the PC. If you're working on a Mac, you go to the Illustrator menu, then choose the Preferences command. It's not nearly so far down the list on the Mac. And choose General. Or you can press Control-K or Command-K on the Mac. Now, I know that K doesn't stand for Preferences or General, for that matter. It might, if you really went out on a limb, stand for Kernel, but that's not what we have here. But know this, Control-K or Command-K on a Mac gets you Preferences command inside of a wide array of Adobe applications. So learn it once, it works across the board. Anyway, Control-K gets the Preferences command. Notice that very first option, keyboard increment. It's even already selected for you. Take it down, I suggest, to 0.2 points like so, or some very fine increment, because you can always increase the size of that increment by adding the Shift key. So if you press Shift with the arrow key, you move in a 10x version of this keyboard increment right there, which would mean 2 points at a time, but you can't move in any finer increments than what you specify here. Now, for purposes of these pen tool cursors, I'm going to take this value down even lower to 0.1. Now, there's no need to make changes to any of the other options inside of this particular panel, but I do want you to note this button right there, Reset All Warning Dialogues. Here's the idea. When you're working along in Illustrator, the program has a propensity of coming up with little warnings every once in a while to tell you that you're doing things wrong because its ways are so wacky in the first place. So up will come an alert message, and you'll have the option of saying don't show again and then clicking OK. And ostensibly, that would make life better, except for now the feature continues to misbehave. It just doesn't give you a warning. And once you discover that's the case, you may want to bring back the warning, and you can do that by clicking on Reset All Warning Dialogues. Now, I haven't turned anything off yet, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to click on Next. And now notice here in the anchor point and handle displays that you can change how anchor points display if you need bigger handles on screen, because notice these little points right here are pretty dinky. And that's great if you have good eyesight, because then the points aren't intrusive. But if your eyesight is lagging a little bit, then you may want to go with bigger anchor points. And you can experiment with those as much as you like. You also have the option of making your handles bigger or more freehand-like in the case of this last guy. And we'll see what control handles are in a later chapter. You have the option of highlighting anchors when you mouse over them. You definitely want that left on. And then finally, you can show your handles when multiple anchor points are selected. We'll discuss that later. That ends up showing you a lot of handles at a time, though, and it can be pretty distracting. The snap 2-point option determines how closely you drag one point to another for them to snap into alignment with each other. 2 pixels works actually pretty great. And then 3 pixels for your tolerance of selection. That is, if you're trying to click on something and select it, how close do you need to be to really get it selected? And you can fuss with that later if you want to, but I'm telling you, a tolerance of 3 works really great for me. This control clicking option is new to Illustrator CS5. I definitely recommend you leave it turned on. That's command click on the Mac. Finally, there's object selection by path only. And this is a checkbox I am going to mention probably a dozen times over the course of this series because I consider it to be so useful to turn it on. And the idea here is that inside of a standard drawing program, you want to be able to click in a big black rectangle, for example, click inside of it in order to select it. But if you turn this checkbox on, you have to click on its outline in order to select it. Well, this is no standard illustration program. This is the most powerful illustration program ever invented, and you need to be up on your game in order to use it. And you're going to be much better off if you select this rectangle by clicking on its path outline, because that means you can marquee inside of the rectangle in order to select the pen tool and so on. It's going to give you way more flexibility. For now, just trust me and turn this checkbox on. All right, that's good enough for now. We will visit still more important preference settings in the next exercise.